This would be Memory Lane Perspective Part 6, and it shows a later development of the watercolour where there are really quite individual choices about what colours you put where, as long as they are different. So magenta against green, green against magenta, or orange and blue, and figures sort of yellow against, well, that's green. Can't have opposites everywhere. So I put flat colours over most of the subjects, and even on these boxes tried to vary the colour of ochre from more dilute to more ochre to a little bit of grey in the ochre. So as wooden boxes would be, slightly different colours. Red against green, against red, against green, against yellow, and the same here. For glass, and there's quite a lot of glass in this image, I was going to suggest putting a grey wash over windows before adding detail, if there's any detail to be added behind the window or in the window. So this is a mixture of ultramarine and a little bit of yellow ochre, making a blue-grey, something like that. And that's quite a translucent solution of colour, quite wet. And I was hoping to use that as to represent the density of glass. So glass has some potential for blocking out light a little bit. So if I put this glaze over the area of the window frame I painted a little bit darker. So that's something that you can decide whether it matches the colour scheme of the rest of the shop. This is this grey glaze of ultramarine, little bit of ochre, and yeah, it's mostly blue, this colour. So it dries, it looks like that when it's wet, dries a little bit lighter. So I'm going to put that colour into all these areas of glass, and perhaps there could have been curtains, I suppose, on some of these windows. This one I haven't got the blind shut on, so it just describes the area of the window without having to paint lots of detail as to what's inside the shop window. So the theory, these windows going back into space would be lighter or paler, showing less contrast. Let's see if I can get into these fine areas here. Holding the brush up right. So I haven't recharged the brush, which means there's progressively less colour on the brush to paint into those distant areas. I did this earlier with the car and painted a sort of grey for the glass over the area of the car windows. And if I just pick even just the same grey and paint the interior, what I can see of the interior, something like that, in another grey, I'm hoping that just gives a little bit of depth to the car. I've painted the tyres in this grey, and I've painted the wheel surrounds in the blue, and it depends how much detail you want to put into this. I was hoping we'd add shadow. The radiator, if I go over it with a sort of grey line there, that's rather difficult to do, different grey lines. There was a sort of grey or vent in the radiator there, and the chrome hubcaps would be a little bit darker, possibly in the lower part of the hubcap. So I haven't added shadow yet. Looking at these upper floor windows, they would reflect the sky. This is what I think happens with glass. And glass windows might face in slightly different directions. So an upper window might reflect the sky more. That's cerulean blue and a little ultramarine, tiny bit of yellow ochre. And a lower slightly lower window, lower down, might reflect the sky differently or might reflect darker. It's a sort of grey colour. Is in photographs, windows often look black, and I'm trying to make the association with colour. Glass reflects light, reflects whatever's around it, so there will be colour of whatever's nearby, and that could be the sky in this case. So leave a gap for the glazing bars. It's a bit careless. Press down. Something over here then. Blue-grey. So I'm going to continue that bluer colour in the upper window. Something like that. A little bit darker than the sky, because the sky is the source of light, so the window is receiving light, not giving it. So all these upper floor windows, a little hint of blue in the mix, going away to the most distant. So it's given those windows, the upper ones, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of difference. And the lower, I think the lower window, I'm just going to make that slightly darker. It's all theoretical this, but it's partly based on observation. So that's got a little bit of crimson in the blue mix, going slightly darker. I'll let that dry. So far this has all been wet on dry. The earlier stages with the sky, that was wet into wet. Darker, darker. Difficult to do those lower windows, but it's a little bit stronger nearer, a little bit paler further away. Let's look at this window on the right, rather on the left. This is has dried now, so whatever you paint this in, even if it's just another grey, will be influenced by the colour that's over the whole thing. So if I painted this airplane in a sort of, as if it's a silvery colour, then it's already in the window, so it looks sort of behind glass a little bit. If I paint the globe, I paint this sort of greeny colour, that becomes duller, so whatever colour that was, that's a sort of light green colour, something like that. But if I paint that onto this grey glaze, it automatically becomes greyer. And there's very little water and very little colour involved in that. So if I had a blue, that would be cerulean blue colour, something like that. And I paint that, that's also going to become greyer because it's painted onto a greyer background. So anything that's painted onto this grey will become a bit quieter, a little bit less grey, a little bit less bright. Just because this is a near object, I feel I've got to put something there, even if it's just a grey. you try and make it look like there's an element between these objects and the viewer. So that might be light along the bottom of this shelf, and these might be holidays, lists of things, since we're looking in a travel agent's, something like this, just an impression of text or lettering, something of that sort. And flags, well, it's into politics. What are these flags? But just some idea of a flag, an impression of one. Probably for a country that doesn't exist. That's a little bit of grey. So what's to follow is, and it would be shadow going onto this, and that's something I haven't approached yet. So the window in the greengrocers, that would be the same idea as the boxes outside, which have got colour in them, but the colour, any colour that you put on here, even if it's quite strong, will be muted a bit by the fact that there's a grey wash over the whole window. So I put green there. I'd rather try and put opposite colours, so if there's something green, I'd have something a little bit red, but not such a bright red. There, something like that. Perhaps a dark red. The detail, something similar there. So the colours that I put in the upper floor windows are dry, and what happens with light, generally with light from above, which is something is the final part of this, is looking at shadow. The recess of the window, this part here, would be in shadow, so that will be heavily in shadow. Not quite so much water though on the brush, so a little bit less water and a darker grey glazing bar, so that's in shadow. And I'm hoping that just adds a little bit of depth to the window. It makes it look like it's going back. And there ought to be a little bit of a shadow under there. So that small area of shadow that's sort of underneath this projection of a sill here, that just helps that to come forwards. Following the line of perspective, following the line down to the vanishing point. Same thing happening in the top of the window, following the line down to the vanishing point. Little colour on the brush, very little colour. And this overhang, that would be a little bit in shadow, so I'm hoping that's added a bit of depth to the windows. What's missing from this then is cast shadow. What happens when this is lit, say from one direction, lit from above, these awnings produce a pool of shadow underneath, and that's something that adds depth also adding shadow to figures. So if light is coming in from this direction, then the opposite side of the figure will be in shadow, and that perhaps reveal a little bit of folds and creases. And that's something that will follow in the final part of memory lane perspective. Zoom out of that a little bit.